Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you Dragon Quest XI's Echoes of an Elusive Age Definitive Edition for the Nintendo Switch. Wow, I am not putting that full title on my title of this video, because that's just ridiculous. So, this may seem like just a regular old review to you guys, but it's actually a re-review. I filmed and edited and processed an entire review for Dragon Quest XI, and I'd like to say that my opinions are still accurate, but after watching through it probably almost a dozen times, I realized that the way I presented my opinions were perhaps a little bit too harsh. Now, normally I'm the type of person that just doesn't care about how harsh I come across, because it's like, people are going to get offended by everything on the internet, so don't worry about it. But when it comes to something with such a lasting legacy like Dragon Quest, I felt like I should at least try to review this more objectively, as opposed to, well, this is my first Dragon Quest game, and so there's a lot of remnants of the past here that are holding this game back from greatness. So I hope you'll forgive that. And I also hope you'll forgive the unedited footage, because I felt like it's the little things in the Switch release that make it add up, that make it the definitive edition, as opposed to me cropping out certain boring stuff. Because who knows, the boring stuff I cut out might be a huge improvement over the PS4 original. So, normally when I review games that are multi-platform and come to the Switch later, I don't like to spend a whole lot of time talking about the differences. I like to focus on, okay, let's just review this as a Switch product. But when you have Definitive Edition in the title, you kind of have to break that rule a little bit. So just to name a handful of the major changes in this port, you can choose between English and Japanese audio. To put that into perspective, in case you're like, Paul, that's no big deal, we've been doing that for ages. The original Japanese release of this didn't have voice acting at all. And then when it came to America, they only did English voice acting. So this is the first time you're hearing Japanese audio for this. And it's also the first time you can switch between that and the English voiceovers. Now, I didn't say this in my original review, but I actually really like the English voice acting a lot. I didn't try Japanese because I don't like Japanese voice acting, but I found that there's quite a wide variety of accents and tongues in this game, and that must have been really hard for them to gather people from seemingly all over the globe to record, but surprisingly it works. There's not really a bad performance to be found. The only thing I could say I was disappointed in is that the game's not fully voiced, because I heard that there's more voice acting in this version than in the original PS4 release, but I don't really know how much more there is, apart from I heard that a lot of the event modes that were previously silent are now voiced. Another big change is that the original version had, frankly, a quite awful synthesized soundtrack that honestly hurts my ears just listening to it, especially the tracks they included in Smash Bros. Ultimate's DLC. The Switch version keeps the synthetic soundtrack, but it also lets you switch to an orchestral OST whenever you want. In fact, when you play the free demo on the eShop, you have to play it symphonically. And this is by far the grand experience musically. In fact, I would say that this is actually the main reason why I decided to rent this from GameFly. If it wasn't for that, I probably would have just said, oh no, not another Dragon Quest game, and just didn't pay it any heed. That being said, if you don't believe me that the soundtrack is awesome, let me quote my dad. Now, my dad does not like video game music. In fact, he is notorious for saying that's the stuff you listen to nowadays. But when I was capturing footage, which ended up being deleted, so you're actually seeing older footage, when I was recapturing footage for this game, my dad was listening to the music in the background, and then he came over to the TV, gave the TV the surprised look like he had just come back in time and had never seen a TV before, and then he said, wow, this game has really good music, in this like super surprised voice, like, games are capable of having good music, Dad? What are you talking about? So, if he says it's great, then you can take my opinion doubly. You can also play the game in 2D mode, which is the first time this is available in the North American release. There was a Japanese-only 3DS game that played in a top-down 16-bit aesthetic. Thank goodness this is a re-review, because in the original I unfairly compared it to 8-bit visuals, when it's clearly much more Super Nintendo inspired. I didn't do a full playthrough of the 2D mode, but there is a new area that was originally 3DS exclusive that's now coming to the Switch version, which is called Talkington, which forces you to play in 2D style even if you already have your game set to 3D mode. And you get to visit past Dragon Quest worlds, and you get a more retro-themed experience. Now, like I said, this is my very first Dragon Quest game, so I'm not going to say like, oh, the 2D improvements feel better or back to the basics. I'm going to say I wasn't a huge fan of it because I'm not a huge fan of random, non-statistical Japanese RPGs. Now, when I say non-statistical, I mean the statistics aren't apparently evident. So, for example, I love Fire Emblem because right before you enter the battle, they give you a percentage meter as well as the amount of damage you'll give. In Dragon Quest, a lot of times you just have to guess. You don't even know if the enemy's running low on health or not. And for a 2019 game, it's kind of embarrassing that there's so much left to the imagination. Now, maybe that's part of the retro appeal, I don't know. So then that begs the question of, okay, Paul, well, what do you think about the 3D mode? Honestly, to say that this game didn't wow me would be a lie. To say that it's one of the best RPGs I've ever played, I just can't say that in good conscience. Honestly, this game feels like it's constantly sticking its foot in the past while only sticking half of a foot out to try to modernize the formula. And just to put into perspective how close this game sticks to tradition, in case you're thinking, Paul, you're just exaggerating because you don't like the genre. So, for starters, your attacks don't have a definitive damage base. You could cast a spell on every enemy in the vicinity, and they'll each get different damage. You might be able to kill one enemy in one hit, but the other, you can't. You also might miss hitting the enemy for no reason other than the statistics that are invisible are preventing you from knowing whether you can hit them or not. There's no real-time command you could do that might make it easier for you to hit them, like, say, in other recent action games. Also, this game is extremely linear, despite the fact that it tries to hide it, because it has a lot of sprawling environments. But the thing is, you really don't have to explore the environments all that much to fully complete it. In fact, once you get to the dungeon exploration, it becomes even more linear. Almost as bad as the Phoenix Wright series, but this game has side quests. Now, a lot of people have said that this is the kind of game where you can complete most of it without grinding. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to disagree there, because this is the first game I've reviewed where I didn't actually beat it, but I came pretty darn close. I got to the final battle, and I even got to the second phase, and the enemy's health was nearly down, because that's the big thing they introduced in the battle mechanics, was the enemy's names will gradually change to a deeper shade of orange the more damage they've taken. So that's a step in the right direction, but it still doesn't beat a simple heart bar that Ocarina of Time, Legend of Zelda 1987 had. Weird, but I guess it's a good step for the Dragon Quest series, even if it feels like, it took you long enough, Enix. So I got to the final battle, and I thought I was doing really well, but for some bizarre reason, I just seemed to hit this deadlock right when the boss was whittled down to the end, and it took me probably about a day's worth of playing, and I still didn't make any progress, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me what was wrong. I would try grinding, but then the grinding would take a long time, and I would be like, this is just getting too obnoxious. I want to know what I'm doing wrong so that I can know exactly how to improve, rather than having to travel all over the world to get this exclusive piece of armor that's going to make the battle easier without telling me how it makes the battle easier, because you never know how much damage you're going to take. Now, the battle system is turn-based, either in 2D or 3D mode. You select your attacks from a menu, and then you decide which enemy you want to attack. You don't have options to manually guard or manually do a critical. That's all determined by a bunch of numbers. You do have an option to play the game in free roam mode where you can move your character around in 3D space, but yet your attacks are still turn-based, which is really weird. Honestly, I never got adjusted to that, and I just stuck with the classic camera, because that's more akin to games like Tokyo Mirage Sessions and Paper Mario from my experience. So I kind of stopped myself a little bit before when I talked about the changes to the definitive edition. And that's because it's hard to talk about changes to a game that you never played it in its original format. But most of the changes, besides what I mentioned, are more so a huge variety of quality of life improvements that add up to make one compelling package. For instance, things such as when you're riding on a horse and you run over an enemy. That's existed since the original game, but now it gives you a little bit of experience. Or the fact that when you mine for ore, the items from the ore will jump right into your inventory as opposed to falling on the floor for you to individually pick up the pieces. And little things like that add up a lot. One of my favorite additions was the ability to change the speed of the battles. When I watch footage of the original version, it almost makes me sick. Like, oh my gosh, this battle is so slow. I'm playing this on the fastest speed, and even this feels pretty slow. But in the original release, it felt like a 15 frames per second ancient Nintendo 64 game. It was laughably abysmal. Playing with the symphonic mode was pretty great. I think it's definitely one of the best sounding soundtracks, even if I don't think it's the most effective. The game has a lot of repetition and doesn't really have that many tunes to spare. They often recycle pretty much every town tune. The battle tune is basically the same for like the whole game. That gets old. One thing the Switch version slightly releases is that there's free DLC. And if you equip that DLC, then you can change the background music in the overworld sections to that of Dragon Quest VIII. The problem is that it's only in the overworld and not the entire soundtrack, which the game made it out in the options menu. Like you could change every song to be one from Dragon Quest VIII, but it's actually only the overworld. The battle music is still the same. The town music is still the same. Sounds good, but it does get repetitive after you've been to countless towns. This might have to have the largest number of villages I've ever seen in any kind of game. And it's just amazing how they could cram so much into this world, but yet not make it feel like Breath of the Wild at the same time. If you're going into this looking at the graphics and the style, you might be thinking, oh, this is Square Enix's attempt to make an open world game Dragon Quest style. Nope. You'd be far removed from that. This game is ridiculously linear and really punishes you for going off of the beaten path with the exception of a few side quests. The areas are certainly big, but none of them are what I would call open. There are loading screens and transitions to major areas, and you can't even view the whole world map at once. While this may be standard practice for the JRPG genre, it does kind of feel like stepping backwards now that I've taken my first step into Nintendo's attempt at broadening the worlds. Dragon Quest looks really beautiful. This is another example of fantastic optimization from an earlier platform onto the Switch. The PS4 original, of course, looked great, but it had such a great cutesy art style that it translated really well to the Switch. The fact that it runs pretty amazing, and it still manages to add a whole bunch of changes and quality of life improvements on a game that should be already taxing on the Switch, is a testament to how much love and resources Square Enix was willing to pour into a game to give the fans what they wanted and to honor some super deep wish Satoru Iwata had. I'm not going to go into that. There are plenty of other YouTubers that'll talk about it. Overall, I liked my time with Dragon Quest XI, but I wouldn't say it was a flawless experience. There were definitely moments that I felt were too prolonged. There were parts of the story that I thought were like trying to prove a point or be emotional, and I just couldn't take it seriously because either the characters' facial expressions were reanimated for the 100th time, or the characters were just standing in place when they should have been panicking. little things like that added up, and sometimes they would like make big deals, or to be more specific, they wouldn't make a big deal enough out of something that should have been obvious from the get-go. One of the best examples of this that I can think of is when I visited a town where everyone spoke in haikus, because it's supposed to be based on Japanese culture. The problem is that no one seems to address how these people got this manner of speech. At least in the Once Upon a Time musical, you have a reason for why everyone is singing. But in this, it's just like, no, that's just a quirk of everyone in this town. Is it an ancestral thing? Is it because there's a curse that forces everyone's speech to be in haikus? Not even the person in your party that's known for being the blunt one saying, how stupid can you get, says, guys, seriously, why can't you just speak in plain sentences? And maybe I'm overthinking things, but it just feels like no one knows how to laugh at the absurdity of the situations these characters find themselves in. So would I recommend this if you've already played the PS4 original? Heck yes! If you loved that game, you're going to love this definitive edition even more. You're especially going to love how there's all new story content, and the new 2D mode is going to feel like a trip to Dragon Quest's past. Maybe not in the best way possible, but you can always switch back to the 3D mode when you're at a save statue if you end up not liking it, which that alone makes it worth the pain I went through just for the fact that they gave you the option to switch out mid-game. The fact that they have so many options at all is a welcome one. Overall, this game sounds beautiful, looks beautiful, and for the most part is going to please long-time Dragon Quest fans. For people like me that are not a fan of this genre particularly, it's only going to be mildly better than, say, we would have expected from this. I personally would not recommend this if you're not a fan of the JRPG genre, but if you've been invested in Dragon Quest since the beginning, or at the very least since the 3D games, this definitely has some of the best characterization, music, and production values that I've seen from looking at old footage and reading old Nintendo Powers and whatnot. So definitely give this a try, especially the Switch version. It is by far the definitive edition. I wasn't able to list all of the changes in this video, but I will link in the description a list I found online by The Gamer. Hope I got that name right. I'll correct it in the description if I didn't. Where they list like pretty much everything that's changed, and it's so amazing how much effort they put into pleasing the fans and just saying, yeah, this didn't work, let's fix it. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Again, if I missed anything at all, let me know in the comments section. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and companies make more definitive editions for the Switch. It's starting to make me feel good to be a Nintendo nerd. Bye.